Hello, YouTube. Today I wanted to talk about my recent playthrough of Black Myth Wukong, and I wanted to sort of do a discussion video talking about some of the aspects of the game that I enjoyed, as well as some of the things that I didn't like. Before I actually go into the discussion, I did want to briefly talk about what defines a Souls game for me. So, uh, I've been a big fan of Souls games for a long time. I've played, everything from Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1 through 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring, as well as Neo's 1 and 2, Lies of P, Code Vein, and the recently released Lords of the Fallen game. I mean, it's not that recent; it's about a few years ago, but it's the newer one. I know they both have the same name, so whatever the newest one is. Um, and one of the things that prevented me from buying Black Myth Wukong a lot earlier was that there was a lot of discourse about whether Wukong can be considered a Souls-like or not. And a lot of people were saying that it wasn't that, to not go into Wukong expecting it to be like Dark Souls or Elden Ring or anything like that. And I think that is a complicated question, and I think whether Wukong plays like a Souls like is dependent on how you, the player, play the game. But what I mean by that is how much do you limit yourself in the tools that the game has available? I do think that if you go into Wukong and you use every tool that's available, the game is going to be significantly easier, almost too easy. I do think that if you do limit yourself in certain spells that you can't use, this game can absolutely be a Souls like. I also quickly wanted to talk about two ways that I personally look at Souls games. Um, and this is obviously a very big oversimplification, but these are two aspects of these types of games that I find personally rather important, and it's going to be the exploration as well as the bosses. So if we sort of plot a lot of these Souls likes into a graph, you'll have one extreme of the spectrum, which would be something like Demon Souls, and even like the new Lords of the Fallen game, where a lot of the bosses are just not very good. But the game is not really about the bosses. It's about the exploration. It's about the traversal of the level. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, and I think a lot of people disagree with me here, but it's just my opinion, would be something like Elden Ring, where I think that the Elden Ring bosses are a lot of fun and they are really good. But I personally am not a fan of the exploration of Elden Ring. I think the open world is quite boring, and I just don't find it enjoyable at all. I think that the legacy dungeons are very good, but everything outside of that, I am not particularly a fan of. So for me, Elden Ring is kind of the opposite side of that spectrum. Where it's just all about the bosses and everything else. I'm not personally a big fan of. And if I were to plot Wukong with these two sort of parameters, I think it is a very good balance. I think that uh, Wukong is really everything I would ever want from a game like this, in the sense that, for the most part, not like Elden Ring, where it's going to be this giant open map with just emptiness and items that you'll never use and things like that. And then you have the bosses, which I would say for the most part are quite good. I don't think that they're going to be like the peak of boss design in these types of games, but I think they're quite good. So I would actually say that Wukong is a fairly balanced experience when looking at these two parameters in mind. So after talking about whether this Wukong falls into the Souls category for me, I wanted to talk about the combat and many of the things that I enjoyed about the combat of Wukong. In many ways, I feel like Wukong does combat way better than Souls games. So, what do I mean by that? So, I want to talk about several aspects of the combat and why I enjoyed them so much. So first, I want to talk about the focus meter. I think the focus meter is a great addition to this type of game, and it also felt very unique to play. In terms of the other Souls and Souls likes in my list, no other game really had a system like this, where essentially the gameplay loop is to play aggressive and fill up this focus meter, and once you build up the focus meter, you're rewarded with a powerful attack. But the system goes far beyond that. So, for example, there's the perfect dodges. So the game rewards you for perfect dodging by giving you focus, which again helps you build this meter so that you can do it, you know, powerful moves that do more damage. Then there's also the varied combo. So there's three different stances that you can pick from, and each stance is a varied combo that you can trigger by hitting the heavy attack button in between the light attack combo, which is just hitting the standard attack button 5 times. Now, what I love about the varied combo in two out of the three stances is that it actually has a counter. So, when you're hitting a boss or an enemy, rather than just sort of do the standard Dark Souls gameplay loop where essentially you get an opening, you hit the boss, and once your opening has run out, you roll to avoid taking damage. Wukong lets you do this varied combo that acts in the form of a counter, and you are rewarded with an additional move that also does damage. So I found that to be a lot of fun. In addition to even just that, the Wukong light attack combo is basically there's 5 steps to it. Essentially, there's 5 attacks in the light attack combo, and the 5th attack in that light attack combo does way more damage and does a lot of stagger if you can get to it. And there's a perk in Wukong that actually allows you to maintain the stage of the light attack combo that you're in after rolling. So I found that the gameplay loop of Wukong's combat to be a lot of fun and to be way more engaging than even Souls games themselves with all of these factors combined, right? You want to build focus, you want to play aggressive to build focus, and in building that focus, you are rewarded with either being able to use your varied combo, which can act in the form of essentially a parry at the cost of 1 focus for a damaging attack, or you can go and try to build 4 levels of focus for sort of the highest tier of your charged heavy attack. Moving on from talking about the combat, I want to talk about the levels of Wukong, sort of the stages and the exploration. So I actually quite enjoyed it. I've sort of said earlier in the video that I wasn't a fan of Elden Ring's open world, and I'm happy to say that Wukong is more along the lines of a traditional Souls game, something like Dark Souls 3, where you're basically your goal is just to go from the beginning of the stage, point A, to point B, which is the end of the chapter. But the game is not linear either. There are oftentimes there's actually quite different paths that you can take that will lead to things like side collectibles and items and things like that. So I found that the size of Wukong's levels to be quite good, at least for my personal taste in this type of game. So I actually quite enjoyed it. Now, I feel like the one thing where that Wukong was missing in this regard is a little bit of the tension that these types of games can elicit when you are traversing a level. So what do I mean by that is, when you look at a game like Demon Souls, right? Demon Souls is the sort of extreme end of that spectrum where the bosses aren't very good, but the biggest engagement in that game is truly the stages. So the thing about the Wukong stages is that for the most part, they really didn't feel that difficult. I never really felt too often to be in a state where I felt like I would run out of resources or run out of healing. And especially some chapters, for example, like chapter 3, has a lot of enemies that I like to call these like nothing enemies. Right? Every Souls game has them. They're basically essentially the lost undead type of enemy where they don't do anything. They don't even have a chance to hit you. You basically one shot them with one rotation of your light attack combo. Or in Souls game, you one shot. You hit him in like basically kill him in like 2 or 3 hits. And to me, enemies like that are kind of just filler because they're not particularly engaging in the sense that you kind of just see the enemy, you sort of mindlessly do your light attack combo, and you just dispatch them without there being an actual exchange. So, another thing I wanted to talk about is sort of the fear of losing something in these types of games, right? Usually, what do I mean by that is when you die, it actually almost all of these types of games, you lose something, you lose a resource. So in this case, or in the case of any all the other games, you lose your souls, right? And the gameplay loop is to make it back to where you died to recollect that resource. Now, generally speaking, honestly, in these types of games, I rarely ever lost my souls to the point where it mattered too much. Um, but Wukong sort of completely did away with that, and I think that removes a lot of the tension that Souls games can elicit when you are playing a level for the first time, where you can get lost in some of these levels and not know where you are. Whereas in Wukong, if you're traversing a level and you end up getting killed, honestly, nothing really happens. You don't lose anything. In addition, there's also the basically this game's version of the Homeward Bone, which is completely free. And this is something that I'm not entirely sure how I feel about. In some ways, it's like, Homeward Bones are so cheap in the Souls games, for example, that you're pretty much always going to have one on you. And even if you have to spend a little bit of souls to get one, like it's not going to have a huge impact. But, you know, for Wukong, you sort of combine both of these things together and you have a system where you can basically teleport back to a bonfire without any cost at all, without losing anything. And even if somehow you screw up and die, you still also don't lose anything. So I found that when traversing some of these levels, that it honestly could get a little bit boring sometimes because there were never any stakes. And I think that's something that a game like Lords of the Fallen, even though Lords of the Fallen has a lot of problems and a lot of issues, and overall the game is pretty janky. If there's one sort of feeling that the new Lords of the Fallen game was able to elicit was, um, I'm trying to think of the word to use, was tension. In Lords of the Fallen, that's the aspect that that game did incredibly, in my opinion, was that feeling of getting lost in a level and sort of weighing your options without, how to get through this without losing or with losing the least amount of resources. And that's something that unfortunately Wukong, in my opinion, just doesn't have at all. I mean, like the most you're really gonna waste in Wukong, I guess, is your time, really. But I just never really felt that level of engagement in going through the Wukong levels. Now I want to move on with essentially my recommendation on the best way to play this game to try to make this as similar to Dark Souls as possible. So, as I alluded to earlier in the video, uh, Black Myth Wukong has a lot of tools that are available to you as the player that will make the game incredibly easy. And if you ask me again, this is all an opinion. Uh, Anyone can play the game however they want, and I think that Wukong has actually gotten a lot of players that don't play Souls games. So to them, they might want to use a lot of these tools because they don't want to get stuck at a boss for a long time, for example. But I sort of wanted to go over some of the spells and if my opinion on whether someone that is thinking of playing this game, if they should use them or not. So first, I'm going to talk about the time stop spell. This is a spell that I couldn't really decide when I first started playing this game if I should use it or not, and I ended up deciding to use it. But towards the end of the game, I'm talking chapter 5 and 6, I realized that I was beating a lot of bosses on my first try or second try, and I tried my best to not use that spell anymore. And in hindsight, I kind of regret even using it at all. So the reason why I'm not a huge fan of the time stop spell and a lot of the other spells in Wukong is because, and this is generally speaking, like I understand that some of these spells have perks in them, that sort of make them more engaging when whether use it at the right timing or use it in combination with your focus. Well, an example with the time stop spell, there's a perk in the time stop spell tree where if you use the spell right before you're going to get hit, you almost get a different animation and it acts a little bit like a parry and you get rewarded for it. But generally speaking, I found that in my experience, I at least that's how I used it. I kind of just used the time stop spell whenever it was available to me. So the fight would start, I would immediately use it and essentially get a free light attack combo. And then the spell would go on cooldown, and whenever it came back up, I would use it again. The reason why I don't like the time stop spell, why I'm not a huge fan of it, is because uh, it it's I'm trying to think of a way to describe it. When we look at, for example, the varied combo in Smash and Thrust Stance, which acts like a counter, that is a mechanic that sort of rewards you for doing something right. So if you use this attack at the right time, you get a parry and you get to do more damage. Whereas the time stop spell is something that you kind of just use without any thought, and you essentially immediately gain value out of it. So I don't want to use the word brain dead, but it's like the word that immediately comes to mind in the sense that you just you start the fight, the spell's available, you use it at pretty much any time. Like it's hard to screw it up. Like I mean, the only time you can really screw up the time stop spells if you use it while the boss is like jumping up in the air and they get stuck in the air and you can't hit them. But generally speaking, you use the spell and you mash the light attack button and you just get free damage. It's almost like completely free, unearned damage. And to me, that's just not enjoyable. Like that's not the reason why I play these games. So if you ask me, if someone is a Souls veteran and they want to make this game be more difficult and play more like Dark Souls, I personally would recommend to not use time stop spell. Then there is the Ring of Fire spell. I think if so, the time stop and the Ring of Fire share a spell slot, meaning that you have to pick between one or the other. I think if you are dead set on using a spell, I find that the Ring of Fire is way more engaging and way more sort of skill based than the time stop because and again I didn't use Ring of Fire, guys. I didn't use it. Because I was using the time stop. But from my limited understanding of Ring of Fire is that when you cast it, assuming you've upgraded the tree and you get the extra benefits that it provides, you gain something, but it's with the condition of you staying inside this ring, right? I'm not gonna say that it's like rocket science and it's like Devil May Cry levels of combos or engagement or anything like that, but there's a bit of a limitation behind it. You use the spell, and to get the benefits, you have to stay in the circle. Okay. Then I want to talk about sort of the defensive spells, which is Cloud Step, and then the Rock spell. I guess I don't know the exact name, but where you essentially turn into a stone, and it's basically kind of like a parry. This game has so many parries, so many things can act as a parry. Now, I didn't use Cloud Step one time, so I'm just going to be completely honest. I'm not really going to talk about Cloud Step too much because I'm just not very knowledgeable on it. I just left mine to my spell slot to the Rock spell, and I actually quite enjoy the Rock skill. Where I know that now I didn't upgrade the Rock spell tree. I left it a default, and from my experience of using it, it's basically a way to avoid damage. Sometimes bosses in this game will do like a huge area-wide explosion attack or whatever, or they'll fly into the air and charge towards you or whatever the case. And oftentimes, when I saw that a move was coming that I didn't have the confidence in dodging, I would just pop the rock. I would use the rock spell, and I wouldn't take damage, but it would almost like shatter the rock, and then my Wukong himself will sort of fall back a little bit. So it almost just felt like I didn't really get too much out of it. Like it's not like the rock spell is like also super engaging or anything like that. But I just find it to be kind of fun to use sometimes as like a defensive option for certain super powerful attacks. Again, if someone really wants to get the most difficult experience in this game, really you could just do a no spell playthrough. But I figured, it's my first playthrough, so I'll use some of the spells. Again, in hindsight, I kind of wish I hadn't used the time stop, but I don't really regret using the rocks skill. I don't know, I found it to be particularly enjoyable, especially when um, got a block. Sometimes some enemies, like for example, the enemies with shields. There's certain enemies in the levels that have these big shields, and they'll sort of use the shields to bash you. And if you use the rock skill, it will actually break their shield. So there's probably so many more elements to that spell that I'm just not aware of. But I just wanted to quickly talk about it because I think that I don't think that it's powerful enough to trivialize the game. Is basically what I'm saying. Now I want to talk about the pluck of many. I believe this was called. I'm just going to call it the shadow clones. For anyone that knows the term shadow clone from Naruto, like that's what I'm going to call it. Which is basically where you summon a bunch of clones of yourself. Now, I never used a spell, but I have seen some clips on it, and it seems pretty pretty powerful. I'm gonna hesitate to call it overpowered. No, you know what? I'm just gonna say I think it's overpowered. Again, it's just my opinion. Um, and really, with these types of Souls games, I was never a fan of anything that summoned an NPC to help fight with you. And the Shadow Clone spell essentially, I mean, that's what it does. It summons a bunch of copies of Wukong, which hit the enemy. And from the little that I've seen of that spell in use, they do some decent damage, and they have their own sort of health. Now I'm not gonna, they're not as tanky as like a Mimic Tier or something from Elden Ring, but the fact that they can do damage and they can tank damage from the boss, I've just never in any of these Souls games liked anything like that. So I completely avoided it. Personally, if you ask my opinion, I think if you want to make the game more difficult, I think this spell should be avoided completely. And then finally, there is the transformations, which I think are also fairly overpowered. Um, the main reason is that you have a new health bar when you transform. So Wukong, you can transform into several different characters, I guess. I honestly only used it once, and it's funny because when I did use it, it happened to be the run where I beat the boss. This was early on. This was in chapter one, and this boss was kind of wrecking me, and I was out of potions, and I knew that I wasn't gonna clear the boss in this attempt, and I don't know, I just got screwed, and I used the transformation, and I beat the boss, even though I didn't really deserve to have beaten him at that time. And just the fact that you can transform into this separate state and have your own independent health bar, which you're basically immune. I mean, honestly, guys, like when you transform in Wukong, you are able to do damage and you are completely immune. Like any damage that you take simply reduces the health of the transformation, and once the health of the transformation goes to zero, you turn back into Wukong. So again, just like the Shadow Clones, I strongly recommend that to anyone that wants to make the game not super easy, just completely avoid the transformations. But again, that's just my opinion. I think I guess that is one of the really nice things about Wukong is that you can kind of choose how you want to play it. But again, in terms of how I like these games, I like when a game can be a little bit difficult and can push me to, learn a fight. And I think that you combine the shadow clones and the transformations and the time stop, that you can really trivialize this game without even having to learn the bosses. And that's not even counting the huge amount of consumables that are available. So the only time I used a consumable in this game was in, I hesitate to even call it a boss, but an encounter in chapter 6, which is essentially a stat check, and that is pretty much the only time I used consumables. So again, just to sort of summarize this section here, imagine you have all these consumables available to you. You have the shadow clones, you have the transformation. Like, it's no wonder that people said that Wukong feels very easy, because yes, if you use every tool that the game has available to you, it's going to completely trivialize the game. So this is why I personally recommend, especially for people that are fans of Souls game, to limit what tools to use. And honestly, when you really think about it, Wukong himself, without using any spells at all, has way more tools available to him than, like the Chosen Undead has in Dark Souls. I mean, you have perfect dodging, you have the varied combo counter, you have level 3, level 4 focus charge attacks. Like, you have a lot of options available to you as Wukong, even without using the spells. So once you add the spells to that, I mean, it's no wonder that the game. A lot of people say that the game feels too easy. One more thing I wanted to talk about in terms of one thing I really liked about Wukong is how much impact your attacks have on a boss. This might be something kind of subtle, I guess, or kind of obvious. I mean, every Souls game has this to a degree, but I think Wukong does this the best out of any Souls game that I've played. Is that when you hit a boss with a powerful attack, uh, you immediately see the effect of that attack on the boss itself, like on the boss's behavior. You hit a boss with a level 3 or level 4 charge focus, or even in some cases the last hit of your light attack combo, the boss will like stumble. The boss will stumble back, and in some cases, if the attack is powerful enough, they'll fall down. And I wish that other Souls games would do this as well as Wukong did. Don't get me wrong, like Souls games do have a stagger mechanic where, yes, if you are aggressive enough and you do enough damage to the boss, um, and you fill up sort of the invisible posture meter, they'll enter the state where you can riposte them. But it feels very like mechanical, very what's the right word, like inorganic in Dark Souls, for example. Um, Whereas in Wukong, it feels supernatural, like the way it flows really well, and I think any future Souls like should take lessons from Wukong on this. I can't understate how satisfying it felt to play this game when you would hit a boss and you would actually see them, the immediate impact of your attack on the boss. Moving on to an aspect of the game that I think was a missed opportunity was not having enough variations on the light attack combo. And this is a complaint that I've actually seen other people talk about, and I agree with them. I like this game a lot. I think this is a great game, but I do agree that yes, kind of being stuck using the same 5-hit light attack combo can sometimes feel a little bit old. Even if I will say that to me, it's sort of the game within the game. The game within the game is trying to find a way to get to the final hit of the light attack combo. That was sort of like a mini game in and of itself, in addition to fighting whatever it is that you're fighting. But there actually is a weapon in Wukong that has a different light attack combo. It's jarring to me because it's kind of like hidden away. It's very easy to miss, and I actually ended up missing it until I was watching a friend play, and he did this side quest that led to this boss, and he got this new spear that had a different move set. And I just don't understand why the developers would keep this hidden away. And in addition to that, I just wish that there were more different move sets. I wish there were like maybe 3 or 4 different light attack combo move sets. And this is the part where maybe a lot of people disagree with me, but rather than having all these spells, which yeah, they're flashy, and visually stunning, but I would have preferred having different variations of the light attack combo, and I really would have liked to see them change the number of hits it is. So maybe have a light attack combo that is 3 attacks instead of 5, but maybe it's weaker. Have a light attack combo that's like 8 hits instead of 5, but the final hit is like insanely powerful. And just having varying move sets. Instead of having, all these spells, I wish there was a skill tree that lets you maybe edit your light attack combo, and in some of the same ways I mentioned just now, like, oh, I want my light attack combo to be the least amount of hits possible, but yes, it's going to do less damage. Um, so I think that was a missed opportunity. That's kind of like one of my few disappointments with this game, and it sort of goes back to also Sekiro, for example, where you are stuck using one weapon the entire game. And this is where I have to give some additional enjoyment for me in games like Dark Souls 3 and really just most Souls games where you find a new weapon and you equip it and you see the move set. You try out the move set, you try out the heavy attack or the weapon art or whatever the case may be. And unfortunately, Wukong, it's just not a thing, and I wish it was. I think it would make me like the game a lot more. I want to discuss the three different stances a little bit. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, there's one particular stance that I have a bit of an issue with. I think that, first of all, Smash and thrust stands are great. I like them a lot. And I think they complement each other quite well. On one hand, you have Smash stands where when you hit level 4 focus, you get this brand new animation for your charge heavy, and it does a ton of damage. And on the other hand, you'll have thrust stance where when you hit level 4 focus, um, and again, this is assuming you've like maxed out that progression tree. Um, but when you hit level 4 focus on thrust stance, you'll almost get like it cuts the animation significantly. So you do the level 4 charged attack extremely fast. And I think in both of these stances, there felt a tangible incentive to try to hit level 4 focus. Now, I didn't mention this before, but in Wukong, you can hold the heavy attack button and charge all the way to level 3 focus. But you can't charge past level 3. The only way to get from level 3 to 4 is to either perfect dodge to gain focus or, play aggressively and constantly be hitting your opponent. And then once you hit level 4 focus, it's going to deplete. Like, it's not like you just keep it until you use it. You have like a window to use it. It's similar to in Liza P when you max out a boss's posture meter and you have a set amount of time to use a heavy attack to do a bunch of damage. Now, my problem with also, I do also want to mention that, again, both Smash and Thrust Stance have a built-in counter in their varied combo. So again, the varied combo is hitting the heavy attack button in between your light attack combo, and both varied combos of Smash and Thrust have a counter. Have a built-in counter. They both have different effects. The Smash counter essentially does, you know, lets you avoid damage, and then you can do a follow-up attack that does like significantly more damage. And then for the thrust stance, the counter is almost like a backstep, and then you can follow up that backstep with a another attack. But my experience is not as powerful as the smash follow-up attack. But in thrust stance, you have a lot more options. Like in thrust stance, again, you can get a parry, but you've now backstepped. So you've sort of gotten yourself out of harm's way. And even after the backstep, you can choose to do a follow-up heavy or hold the light attack combo for a completely different attack. So basically what I'm getting at is that both of these stances felt great. But I have to talk about pillar stance, and I could be completely wrong. I always have to give this disclaimer because I don't want to sound like an idiot. Hey, maybe pillar stance is like completely overpowered, and I'm completely wrong on this. I don't know. All I'm saying is that pillar stance did not feel particularly strong, and it didn't feel particularly fun either. So, for example, the pillar stance varied combo just felt extremely janky to use. At first, I was talking to someone and I was like, I don't understand what the purpose of this varied combo is. Like, it doesn't, like, why would I ever do this? It's incredibly difficult to hit. Well, basically, let me just describe what it is, and I'll have some footage on it on the screen as I'm talking about this, but essentially you swing around in your pole, right? And after you have to hit an enemy, after you've hit something, you can hit the heavy attack button to do like a final follow up attack, right? The problem with this varied combo that I encountered a lot is that, again, it's just insanely hard to hit the actual powerful follow up after swinging around the Wukong staff. And it doesn't have a counter. You know, there you can get. I think one of the perks in the Pillar Stance tree lets you get some damage reduction while you're swinging around the pole, and I do feel like you get a little bit of super armor while you're doing the heavy, but there's no counter involved. You know, you're still taking damage, and the actual damage that you would do for hitting this charged heavy follow up of the very combo did not even feel that good. I often wonder, like, why am I even trying to do this attack? Like, the reward is just it's just not there. Like, the only situation I can think of where doing this attack would be warranted is if the damage was absolutely insane, like higher or at least equal to a level 4 uh heavy with level 4 focus heavy attack and smash stance. So just in general, pillar stance just felt very unsatisfying, just extremely unsatisfying. And it's sort of like I mentioned earlier, you know, both thrust and smash almost have like a unique animation when you're doing a level 4 focus. And, you know, maybe pillar does, and I just missed it. But to me, when I did a level 4 focus heavy or charged heavy in pillar stance, it looked identical to level 3. Like it, you know, and if there is a difference in animation, it's pretty subtle. Um, so I don't know, man. I just think that pillar stance is just feels very unrewarding. It just feels really clunky and slow. And you know, when I first started playing the game, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna main pillar stance. I'm gonna only use pillar stance. And thank goodness that I tried the other stances, because to me, I just don't find it particularly enjoyable to just, you know, charge the heavy attack while perching on top of the staff and just letting go of the button, and that's pretty much it. You know, like I found trying to go for counters to be significantly more engaging than anything that Pillar Stance had available. So I'm gonna just give a bit of a my call again. It's my call. I could be wrong. I am not a scientist of Wukong, but I'll just say that Pillar Stance felt fairly weak. So, and I think that not only did it feel fairly weak, but it felt way, way less engaging and fun than the other two stances. I do want to mention an issue that I personally think that the game has regarding the weapon crafting progression. So there is a point in the game at the end of Chapter 4, assuming that you have beaten two certain bosses that drop a specific upgrade material called Coon Steel, that you can make a weapon that is more powerful than anything else in the game at that point. I believe that the weapon is the Golden Loom Staff. I think that's the name. And I find this design decision to be a little jarring because at this point in the game, again, the end of Chapter 4, uh, this is the only weapon available, or at least it was the only weapon available to me. And I don't think I missed anything up to that point that would have given me another option. But again, once you get these two Coon Steels, you can make the Golden Loom Staff, which is essentially a pillar stance weapon. But my issue with this is that what if you don't want to use pillar stance? What if you only like smash or only like thrust? So it felt very strange that at that point in the game, I've gotten these two late game crafting materials to make this powerful weapon, but the powerful weapon is it's built to be played in pillar stance. And I'm just a little bit confused as to why there aren't, at that stage in the game, beginning of Chapter 5, end of Chapter 4, why there aren't other options that use the Coon Steel to make a weapon that is at least general usage or build for smash or thrust. And this is just kind of my theory. And once again, I could be completely tripping here. But I was sitting there wondering if this is maybe the developer's way of sort of balancing out pillar stance, in the sense that okay, you've now gotten two Coon Steels, and you can make this powerful Loon Staff that buffs pillar stance. But we did this intentionally because we know that pillar stance kind of sucks. So this is how we're bouncing around it. We give you this you know weapon that are better than any other options, but it's built to be used with the weaker stance. Again, I could be wrong, but I thought that maybe that was the case. It could be that the developers did that intentionally, or it was just I'm just completely wrong here. But I did want to mention that I looking back, if I were to replay this game, I would not do a fresh save. I would just do New Game Plus. But if someone was playing, from a fresh save, and they have no intention at all of using pillar stance, being at this point in the game, I feel like would be a little frustrating because your only option at that time to use that Coon Steel is a pillar stance staff. So eventually, in Chapter 5, you will be able to make another staff that does buff Smash Stance, but I'm just a little bit confused as to why at that stage of the game there weren't other options for the other two stances in the game. I'm just going to quickly list off some things, and these are fairly specific, that I didn't like about the game in general. One of which being not knowing what benefits would happen when you upgrade a spirit. So, spirits are basically two parts, at least 99% of them. There's the active, which is basically just an attack, and then there's the passive. And certain spirits, when you upgrade them, uh, it's obviously going to upgrade the active, but in some cases, it upgrades the passive. But that only applies to some spirits, and I'm sure eventually, like, there'll be a comprehensive wiki or something that will have every possible effect and things like that. But at least when I was playing, I struggled to sort of find this information, and it was just quite frustrating because you can spend all these resources on upgrading the spirit when all you care about is the passive, and then only to find out that the passive stayed the same. Here's some additional things that I didn't enjoy in my playthrough. I want to talk about, and a lot of these are related to, or some of these, I'm not going to say a lot, some of these are related to Chapter 3. There's two problems I have with Chapter 3, and one is how open it feels. There are certain areas in Chapter 3 that, it almost kind of reminds me of Elden Ring in a way, where, and obviously not to the degree of Elden Ring. Like, when you're in the open world of Elden Ring, I mean, it is literally entire fields of just emptiness. And Wukong never got to that degree. But, there are certain areas, certain sections of Chapter 3 where, if you are trying to be thorough and you're trying to check everything, where the area sort of not only diverts into different paths, but set paths open up a lot. And I just found myself to be running around in this empty snow level, just trying to make sure I check for everything. And that was probably like the moment in the game where I was like the most bored. Was just running around in Chapter 3 and trying to check every corner that I could to just try my best to not miss anything. And then I also want to talk about a little bit about the Pagoda Realm in Chapter 3. So, after beating a certain boss in Chapter 3, you sort of get moved to the next area, which is essentially like a prison. Kind of reminds me of the Tower of Latria in a way of Demon Souls. And there is. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, like, I probably should have looked it up before I started talking about it, but screw it. Like, there is this mechanic when you first get transported to the Pagoda Realm where it will make these certain enemies appear. These lamp men, like these enemies where their faces are lamps, and when this sort of event activates, it summons these enemies and it cuts your health, like it reduces your maximum health. Like it's literally like super similar to how the jailers act in Irithyll Dungeon in Dark Souls 3. But the difference is that, in Dark Souls 3, when this happens, I know what's causing it. Like I know, yes, if the jailers like look at me for long enough, they're gonna lower my health. But when I was going through this area in Wukong, I had no idea how to stop this. Whenever this event sort of activated itself, again, all the enemies will start glowing red, and it would summon these lamp enemies, and it was just very frustrating because, like, the way I play these games is that I like exploring the level. Like, I like being methodical and traversing the level and exploring it. Um, and this area was very frustrating to explore. And once you beat the boss of the Pagoda Realm, these lamp enemies and that entire event will disappear. Um, but I just have to question a little bit why they did this, because a mechanic like this leads to is you just running past everything, just rushing through the level so that you can beat the boss, so that you can actually explore the area properly. And my stupid ass, like I freaking did that area twice. I tried my best because again, I don't want to miss any secrets. I don't want to miss any treasure and items and things like that. So I kept exploring the level, but it was like I know I talked about like how Lords of the Fallen earlier, how Lords of the Fallen and Demon Souls can elicit this tension, but this is not the tension that I'm talking about. Like the tension that I was referring to earlier on in the video with those games is, you are in this foreign place and you have a limited amount of resources, which is essentially your healing, and once you run out of these resources, once you've used up all your healing, just progressing through this world, you're now faced with a choice of like, what do I do? Do I go back to my last checkpoint or do I press forward? Okay, whereas the I guess the tension, I guess if you can call it that, that this elicited was just annoying. It was just just an annoying experience. Whereas like, I'm trying to fight all the enemies, I'm trying to check everything to get treasure and items or whatever, and then this freaking thing will activate, and my maximum health will get reduced, and it will summon these lamp enemies that appear and disappear, and I just found it to be very frustrating. And like I said, I didn't look up exactly how this triggers. I think it's on a timer, like on a cycle, like every couple of minutes it activates. I could be wrong. I still have not looked at it, not looked it up to this day, like exactly what the rules behind that event happening are. But the fact that I got through the whole area and me or the friend that I have that's also playing this game could figure out what exactly, like, how does this work? How does this state of this level, like, what activates it? Like, was I spotted by an enemy? Is it me being spotted by an enemy? Or did I step on a trap? Or what? Like, what causes it? And the only thing that both of us could deduce based on going through this area was that it's just based on a timer. And I did not enjoy that part of the game. And if I were to replay this game, knowing what I know now, I would literally run past every enemy in the area, ignore everything, go kill the boss so that I can properly traverse the area and get the treasure and things like that. So I personally, I'm not gonna say it's like objectively bad or anything. I'm just gonna say that I did enjoy it. Lastly, I do kind of want to mention the end of the game. I found that chapter 5 and chapter 6 were very short compared to chapters 2 through 4. And I kind of just wish that, I don't know, I wish it wasn't so short, I guess is what I mean. Especially the end game. So, for example, to get the necessary crafting material to make mythical armor in this game, you essentially have to do most of Chapter 5. And once you have the materials to make set mythical armor, the game is basically almost over. So you barely even get to use it. And I just wish that they would have, you know, taken some of Chapter 3 out. Again, maybe I'm a Chapter 3 hater, but there were several things I just didn't enjoy too much about Chapter 3. I wish they would have just taken some of the length out of Chapter 3 and padded the end of Chapter 5 so that I can play around with this fancy new mythical armor that I just crafted. But again, like by the time you have all the materials to craft all 5 pieces of whatever armor you decide to make, you're pretty much like 90% done with the game at that point. And then I want to touch on Chapter 6. Chapter 6 was very weird. This open, literally Elden Ring, like this Elden Ring ish chapter where it's just like this huge open world, but it's like completely empty. Like I just don't understand. Like I guess they wanted to just show off the tech of you flying on the Nimbus. Um, but a lot of Chapter 6 is just it's literally filler. Like it's like the worst kind of filler. Like for anyone that watches anime and has watched like a shonen, like One Piece or Bleach or Naruto or whatever, um, you know, and they have these like filler arcs of just garbage, filler arcs where nothing important happens. It is literally just a time waster, and that's like the immediate thought that came to mind at Chapter 6. We have this giant map, and you will not explore it because it's mostly empty. So like, if I had to pick between Chapter 6, how it's currently structured, which is this big open area and you're flying around Nimbus, and yes, it looks cool. I get it. Like the spectacle behind it is cool. Or just having a traditional linear level to get through, I would have rather played the level. And this is this is also what I mean with you barely even getting a chance to play the game with the mythical armor that you've just crafted. Because again, Chapter 6 is essentially just it's a boss rush. You get put in this giant open map that has nothing on it, and you just fly from point A to point B. You fight a boss, and you fly from point B to point C, and then you fight another boss. And after you've cleared all the bosses to get the canonic Wukong armor, you're basically on your way to fight the final boss, and the game's over. And again, I don't know if it's just like dev time, like the devs just were on crunch or whatever the case may be, but I just wish that Chapter 3 was just a normal chapter with a level to progress through, rather than this like weird open world filler nonsense. Um, so that's pretty much it with just some random things that I didn't enjoy about the game. Now I'm just gonna go over specific bosses. I don't really, it's not like I'm gonna do like an in-depth analysis or anything, but I did just want to sort of list off some bosses that I really liked and some bosses which I thought were complete trash. So I'm just gonna start with the bosses that I liked. I actually really liked the Yellow Wind Sage, the last boss of Chapter 2. But there is one element to that boss, and just a thing that this game does in general, which I am going to call out here, and it's the having to use a specific item from the secret area to remove some of the BS of the boss. Um, I'm not a fan of that. The final boss of Chapter 2, Yellow Wind Sage, uses that. The final boss of Chapter 4 does that as well. And I've never been a fan of this. Like Elden Ring did this shit with Mog, where you have to get this specific tier to remove this like unfair BS mechanic of the boss, and I'm just not a fan of it. But if we ignore that fact, if we ignore that Yellow Wind Sage does have that, I actually very much enjoyed that fight. Same thing with Tiger Vanguard, like the one that you fight in like the blood pool. Uh, you know, that fight was a lot of fun as well. I want to shout out Yin Tiger. I think it's one of the most fun fights in the game. Boss is super aggressive, and just getting all these perfect dodges and dodging weaving in between attacks of Yin Tiger's aggression was a lot of fun. That boss took me a lot of tries, but like for me, a boss is enjoyable where you can get stuck at this boss for like 30 minutes to an hour and still have a good time. So I think Yin Tiger is one of the more fun, or one of the most fun bosses in the game. It's the same thing with Yellow Loon. Yellow Loon is, I think, the boss that took me the most attempts out of any boss in the game. Um, and this is one of those. I'm not. Yeah, I would say one of the few bosses in Wukong where I felt like I truly needed to learn all of his moves. Obviously I'm not like a master of Yellow Loon, but I had to find him enough times where I had to, have an idea of what he was going to do because it's a hard boss. I also want to shout out the Scorpion Lord, another super fun boss. He's super aggressive, and to me, Wukong is at its most fun when you're fighting an aggressive boss and you're, perfect dodging all these attacks and again, that's the fun part too. Is that when you fight these aggressive bosses and you're doing all these perfect dodges and you're passively building on focus into unleashing your hopefully a level 4 heavy attack, and it's just this really like fun cinematic experience. And bosses like Yin Tiger and Scorpion Lord and Yellow Loon, they can all elicit this type of excitement um, that you can get from fighting a boss in a Souls game. Also want to shout out to Yaksha King. um, it's kind of unfortunate that I just think that like at that point of the game for me, that like I was just too overpowered, and just in terms of like stats and armor and stuff. And because I don't think I really should have beaten the Yaksha King on my first try. And to be honest with you, like do I know the boss? Like do I like I feel like I can confidently say that like I know the Yellow Loon boss fight, and I know the Yin Tiger fight because these guys took me many attempts. And I think Yaksha King probably should have been one of those bosses, but for whatever reason, I was able to clear him on my first chance. It might have just been luck, but if I, had to give, if I had to decide what the best final boss is out of all the chapters, I would say that it would either be between Yaksha King and Yellow Wind Sage. I think both of them are just, again, aggressive, exciting, fun bosses. Also, want to shout out to Erlang. Sorry if I mispronounced that. The secret, basically the Melania of Wukong. That boss is also a lot of fun, and he's super challenging. And it really, I think it's just a testament to how overpowered you get, assuming you just don't completely troll your build. Like if by the time you get to Erlang, you should have mythical armor. Um, and for how hard he is, it really didn't take me that many attempts to beat him. It could have just been luck, but either way, Erlang is a super fun fight, and I'm just gonna shout him out because that fight is very good. Lastly, the final boss, the final stage of the final boss of the game, is also super good. He does all these like fancy animations where, he like there's at one point where he like takes your gourd, when you're gonna pop a potion and drinks off of your gourd and stuff. Like the fight is super cinematic, but it's like a lot of these games try to make cinematic fights, and I think a lot of the times they flop. A great example of this, in my opinion, is Fire Giant from Elden Ring. I think that boss is complete dog shit. It's like one of the most unfun fights I've ever done in these types of games. And even Wukong drops the ball, in my opinion, with some of these cinematic boss fights. And I just think that the final boss of Wukong is like the perfect blend of a fun, enjoyable fight and cinematics. Now I'm gonna go over the bosses that I think are complete dog shit. So I'm gonna start off with Kang Jing Loon, the dragon in Chapter 3. I don't really have much to say positive about this boss. I guess it looks cool from a cinematic perspective, but from a gameplay perspective, this is absolute shit. To be honest with you, most of the time the dragon is flying up in the air, so a lot of your attacks are just gonna straight up miss. and the boss seems to have this strange command grab attack that is just very difficult to dodge. It could be that I'm just terrible, but it felt very inconsistent to try to dodge this move. I would even go as far as to say it's probably the hardest move to dodge in this entire game. But overall, there's really nothing fun to be had with this boss. And yeah, it's the first dogshit boss that you'll encounter in the game, in my opinion. Following that, I'm going to briefly talk about Captain Wave. This is a different type of dog shit than the dragon fight that I just talked about. The reason why I include a Wave here is because this boss is such a joke that it feels even weaker than some regular enemies that you encounter throughout the game. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me what they were thinking when they made this. I mean, this is the boss that's essentially guarding the temple, which is the last area of chapter 3, and he goes down so fast. I honestly expected there to be a phase 2, but there wasn't. So uh, I don't know what happened with this boss. It's a shame too because I think he actually looks really cool, but the fight is just uninteresting and just boring. Following that, I'm going to talk about Yellowbrow. I think this is another garbage fight. Yellowbrow himself doesn't have a lot of moves. It almost feels like his kit is dare I say unfinished in some ways, and he's just not fun to fight. And I don't even know. His moves are very slow and uninteresting and boring. There's a part of the fight where the essentially phase 2, where you go inside his little hacky sack or whatever, and you fight the final sort of version of the Makabe chief, and that fight is actually quite fun. I kind of wish that was the whole fight. Just give that guy a couple extra phases, and I would have enjoyed that way more than Yellowbrow. And then for the third phase, once again, his moveset is just, it's more annoying than anything. It's not that he's frustratingly difficult, like something like Changing Loon, which is difficult enough to be annoying, to be an inconvenience. Um, but he's Yellowbrow is quite easy, but also boring. And then he also seems to have these cutscene attacks. As far as I know, they seem undodgeable. They seem scripted based on what health you get him to, and they actually do damage to you. So, pretty terrible mechanic if you ask me. I also want to mention 100 Eye Taoist from Chapter 4. This is probably the least egregiously shit fight in this list, in my opinion. But I wanted to include him because of that mechanic that Yellow and Sage has, where without the item from the secret area, the boss enters this state where it almost feels unplayable. Your stamina gets reduced, your movement speed gets reduced, and it's just stupid. It's just such stupid design. The boss is either a complete joke when he's not putting you in the Shadow Realm, or the fight is just completely unplayable if you choose not to use the secret item or you just don't happen to have it. So, yeah, just overall, not a good fight, in my opinion. Following that, I'm going to talk about the carts in Chapter 5. And, these bosses are just total dog shit. Uh, Worse than regular enemies. Most of them just stand there and breathe fire. I mean, some of the most boring fights, they honestly feel like filler. If you ask me, there's one cart boss, which is the last one that you fight before you go to the secret area, and I guess that one is all right, but all the others are just complete shit. I don't really have that much to say. I mean, they all just suck. Now I want to talk about the grasshopper in chapter 6. It feels strange to even include this on this list. I hesitate to even call this a boss. It kind of shocks me that this game went for so long, having mostly pretty good boss fights, and then they hit you with this mandatory stat check garbage. In Chapter 6, I mean, I don't really have anything positive to say about it. I don't understand why the developers don't let players just fight the grasshopper like any other normal enemy. Well, like who in the development team thought this was fun? I'll never understand. Um, yeah, like I have nothing positive to say about it. It's complete trash. And then lastly, I'm gonna mention the giant Chingandang. Just like Fire Giant, I've mentioned Fire Giant a couple of times in this video, which is probably one of my most hated Elden Ring fights. Giant Chingandang might actually be worse than Fire Giant, if that you can even believe it. Um, I don't know what it is with developers just trying to make these sort of epic giant boss fight encounters, and while from a visual perspective, sure they look fine. From a gameplay perspective, they are just some of the most boring shit I've done in this type of game. And yeah, it's indefensible in my opinion. This boss is total trash, and yeah, it sucks. So those are pretty much all my thoughts on Black Myth Wukong. I know it sounds like I was complaining a lot, but overall, I think there are most certainly more positives than negatives. But I kind of just wanted to point out things that stood out to me. And once again, this isn't just like a generic review, but I guess more. I don't want to say generic, but a general, probably the right word. General review, but more of a discussion. I guess just me talking about specific aspects of the game that came to mind. But overall, just like I did in my last sort of discussion video, in terms of a rating that I would give this game, I think I'm honestly a little bit torn between a 7 and an 8. With 5 being average. Obviously, this game is above average, but I think I'm gonna drop an 8 on this game. I think the game certainly has more positives than negatives. I think the combat is extremely fun, and you know, traversing the world, while it's not the peak of this type of game, I think it's overall still very good. I think this game has a lot of not only extremely fun boss fights, but it can also hit that sweet spot of having a fun and cinematic boss fight and does that very well. The last boss is a great example of this. And I think this game can be enjoyed by a wide variety of people, whether you might not play Souls games at all, or you might not even play that many video games at all. I think the developers put enough mechanics and tools to make it so that just about anyone should be able to get through this game just with the sheer amount of options that you have. And if you are more of a Souls fan, Souls player, if you just simply limit what you use, the game can certainly hit the difficulty of just a standard FromSoft slash Souls game experience, and in some cases even exceeded. So yeah, I think I strongly recommend this game to both Souls fans and non-Souls fans. Just if you're a Souls fan and you're going to play this game, I strongly encourage you to um, limit some of the spells that you use. And yeah, that's pretty much it.